Hi, my name is Joe Browne. I am a jazz musician and educator. Many of you know me from various jazz workshops I've delivered in East Kent. Now, obviously this is a very strange time for all of us, but not least for jazz musicians, because the music that we ordinarily create is extremely extroverted music. I don't mean extroverted in the sense of look at me, although of course there is that for some of us, but it's extroverted in the sense that as jazz musicians we get our energy from the presence of the other musicians around us, because jazz itself is such a communicative and interactive art form. That's a very difficult thing to recreate in a lockdown scenario. But of course what we can do, although we can't surround ourselves with other musicians, we can use this time to develop our personal skills on our instrument. So we can spend more time in the practice room and equip ourselves with better musical skills for when we finally do re-emerge into civilization. Now, the tune I'm going to be looking at with you today is called Caravan. It's by Duke Ellington and Juan Tizol. Ellington, of course, a very famous musician, composer and band leader. Tizol, a trombonist and composer who often featured in Ellington's band. And they wrote this tune in collaboration in 1936. Now, Caravan is a very curious composition because although it's a jazz tune, it's got this kind of Eastern quality to that melody, this beautiful kind of chromatic melody line. And also the groove, the rhythmical groove, lends itself to a kind of Latin style of drumming. But there's also a kind of swing element to the middle section of this tune. So it's a great one to learn, and hence it's become what we refer to as a jazz standard. Now, a jazz standard is a tune that most jazz musicians across the world will look to learn and include in their kind of repertoire or catalogue of material, so that when we come together in the context of a jam session or a gig or a recording session, you can call upon one of these jazz standards and hopefully everyone in the band will know that material. And there are numerous recordings of this tune. You can hear Ellington and Tizol themselves perform it on YouTube, but many established jazz musicians have recorded it at some point within their career. So there's a great version by Dizzy Gillespie, Art Pepper, Thelonious Monk, Wynton Marsalis in more recent times. And in fact, it featured heavily as part of the plot, in fact, in the film Whiplash, which was a film that divided jazz musicians quite a bit, but I found it very entertaining. So look out for Caravan in that film. Okay, so I'm here at the piano to talk you through the structure of Caravan and the harmony that is within it. So much of this tune, the A section at least, is based around this chord C7 flat 9 sharp 5. So let's just deconstruct that a little bit. So it's a C dominant 7th chord, so we need our root C, okay? Now we need our guide tones first of all, which are the 3rd and the 7th. So it's a major chord, it's a dominant 7th, so it's going to be a major 3rd, the E natural, and the dominant or flattened 7th, which is B flat, okay? That's your essential chord shape. Then we need any specific alterations that the chord spelling asks for. So the sharp 5, first of all, the 5th degree of C is a G, okay? But if we sharpen that, it becomes G sharp. So there's our sharp 5. Now the flat 9, the 9th is the first extension beyond the octave tonic, okay? So it's going to be a 9, if it, a D natural if it were a natural 9th degree. But the chord spelling is asking for a flat 9, so we're going to flatten that by a semitone so it becomes D flat. And there is a suitable voicing for your C7 flat 9 sharp 5. Remember, when you're playing in a jazz context, you can play any permutation, any inversion of that chord that you like, as long as the guide tones, the 3rd and the 7th, are present in the voicing, and any specific alterations like the sharp 5 and the flat 9 in this case. You don't have to play the voicing I just demonstrated. You could play in any version in any part of the keyboard. Now that's one way of getting that flat 9 sharp 5 sound. Another way is to alternate triads of C major and D flat major, because if you listen to the backing track, and this is the case in a lot of recordings of this tune, Caravan, as well, the bass is implying this semitone shift between C and D flat. So you can mirror that in the keyboard or the guitar very effectively by playing these alternating major triads of C and D flat, and this is the rhythm on the track. The reason that works really well is because all of the notes within those two triads are present in the chord scale of C7 flat 9 sharp 5. If you like, you can add the 7ths to that as well. So there's your triad, your C major triad. Now it's a dominant 7th, so B flat for the C chord, and then for the D flat, there's your major triad. It it would be a major 7th, so the C natural. So you can play. Does this for 12 bars on the A section. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then it resolves to F minor 6. So F, minor 3rd, A flat, 5th, C, and then your 6th, your major 6th, which is the D natural, for 4 bars. And then it repeats the whole of that A section, because the form of this piece, Caravan, is A, B, A, which is a classic form in jazz standards. So that's the A section, finishing with that F minor 6 chord. And then it goes into the B section. Now there's a crucial rhythmical shift here because it moves from a Latin groove into a swing groove. So because it's moved to swing, there's no kind of prescribed rhythm in the harmony part. You can kind of play as if you're comping a soloist, really. Any rhythms you like during this bridge passage. But what you need to play in terms of the chords, it's going to go from F minor 6. The first chord of the bridge is F7, which isn't a minor chord, it's a major chord, and it's a dominant 7th again. So there's our root F. Your A flat from the F minor 6 is going to become a major 3rd, A natural. Your 5th is the C natural, and your dominant or flattened 7th is the E flat. You can add any extensions above that if you understand about extensions. But for now, let's keep it simple. So that's our essential F dominant 7th shape. Now in the bridge, it moves in fourths, and it's a series of dominant 7ths, a fourth apart. So it moves from F7 to B flat 7. Now generally speaking, when you're comping at the keyboard, you want to try and move your fingers as economically as possible, or as little as possible, to the nearest notes of the next chord. So my A natural is going to become the A flat, which is the dominant 7th of the B flat chord. I could keep the C because that's the 9, but I'm going to go down to the root of the chord, the B flat there, and I'm going to come down to the 3rd of the chord there. I'm going to have the 5th on top, okay? There's a B flat 7 shape. And then it moves a 4th again to E flat 7. So I'm going to move down to the G there. There's my 3rd. Keep the B flat because that's the 5th. Move this finger down to the D flat, which is the 7th. And have the root on top as well. That's fine. There's my E flat chord. And then down to A flat 7. So there's my flattened 7th, the G flat. There's the root. There's the 3rd. And I can keep the 5th on top. And that's an A flat dominant 7th shape. Now this is the only time it doesn't stay on one of these dominant chords for 4 bars. It only holds the A flat 7 chord for 2 bars, and then it moves down chromatically to G7. Okay, but it does actually specify in this chord spelling a flat 9, so there it is. I've already got the root down here in the bass, so I'm going to substitute the G up here for a flat 9, which is the A flat. Okay, so there's a suitable G7 flat 9 chord shape. And that's the end of the bridge. Then it goes back into the final A section, which is the same as the first time round.
Okay, so now we know a little more about the way this piece is put together, the structure of the composition, the harmony within it, and the rhythmical groove. We can start to look at how you might want to shape the melody line. Now, Caravan has got this beautiful kind of Eastern snaky chromatic quality to that melody that very much lends itself to personal interpretation. And for that reason, in the charts that I've given you, I deliberately haven't put any dynamic markings or articulation. And that's because I want you to interpret it in your own way. So when I talk now about how to shape this melody, all I can really do is suggest ways in which I might phrase it. But of course, it's entirely up to you. That's one of the great things about music. Now, when I approach a melodic phrase, one of my primary considerations is dynamics. And I think that a lot of the most musical performers, when they consider dynamics, they don't think, right, I'm going to play this particular phrase mezzo piano, I'm going to play this phrase forte. The most musical interpretations often have multiple dynamics within the phrase, or even within a particular individual note. And the effect that that approach has on the music means that it's constantly being shaped, it's ebbing, it's flowing, it's evolving all the time. So if I was to take the opening phrase, the opening A section of the tune Caravan, I'm not going to predetermine particularly how I'm going to play it, but immediately I know that that first note is quite a long note. Now, it's unlikely I'm going to play that at one dynamic level. I'll probably initiate some sort of swell or drop off in dynamics within it. And then going into the second phrase, the chromatic passage, well, let's see. So yes, I definitely initiated it. I sort of hit that opening note and then retreated immediately and swelled through it into that chromatic passage. Again, there was some sort of shaping of the dynamics within that. And then the second long note, again, I retreated and swelled throughout the note. And then the descending chromatic phrase at the end of that A section, for some reason I was inclined to play that really quite quiet, almost pianissimo. And the very last long note, just a kind of modest swell, just to give it a little bit of shape, a little bit of colour there. So that's the main melody line for the A section of Caravan. You will notice in the charts I've provided both the melody part, I've also provided an easier version for all instrumentalists. Now the easier version for the A section is very different from the main melody line. It's more percussive. So when you play that part, I really want you to listen to the kind of drum groove and the bass, particularly because they're playing that same kind of prevailing rhythm throughout the A section. So when you play that, you've got to imagine, if you're a horn player, saxophone, trombone, whatever, you've got to imagine yourself more like a percussionist, more like a drummer. So play it really quite sort of punchy. And the articulation for that is quite prescribed. It's very much short, long, this sort of feel. But again, there's no reason why there can't be some dynamics within that very short phrase. A little bit of a swell on the longer of the two notes each time. Now the middle section of the tune, the bridge section, the part that goes into swing, many musicians have kind of imposed their own melodies on this section. In fact, many just choose to improvise over the chord changes at that moment in the tune. There are so many versions of this bridge that it's quite difficult to remember what Ellington and Titzel originally intended. But the version I've chosen is perhaps one of the more common interpretations, and the reason I like it is because it's in quite stark contrast to the A section. This version of the bridge it requires a kind of legato approach, so a slightly more sensitivity in the way you play it, smoother phrases, less kind of heavily articulated. I would probably opt to play the bridge a little like this. Kind of slightly more sensitive approach, less kind of heavy tonguing or articulation in the way in which I played it. And also quite a lot of vibrato in those long notes. I think I did that partly to give it a kind of a stylistic quality. That's the way in which a lot of musicians may have interpreted that melody in the 1930s when this tune was written. But also, of course, to add a little bit of musicality, I suppose, and colour. So now we've looked at the ways in which you might like to shape the melody. We understand the structure of the piece. Of course, the next thing to look at is how you might want to improvise over this tune. Now, the majority of Caravan is based around this particular chord, this what we're calling C7, flat 9, sharp 5. Now, that sounds very complicated, but there's a scale we can use that expresses all of those chord qualities within it. And what it is, we've talked about the fact that this piece is in the key of F minor concert pitch. Now, if you think of the scale F harmonic minor, many of you will be familiar with harmonic minors versus melodic minors from music exams you've done. So the F harmonic minor is characterized by the flattened 6th degree and the raised 7th degree. So if we're in the key of concert F minor, we've got F, G, A flat, that minor third, B flat, C, D flat, that's your flattened 6th. And then the E natural, the raised or the natural 7th degree. And then, of course, F at the top as well. And the scale, when played in that sequence, sounds like this. Okay, now that first first chord in Caravan isn't an F minor chord, it's a C chord, C7, flat 9, sharp 5. So if we play the same scale, but we start on the note C, we play the same notes, the same intervals, but just starting at a different point within that F harmonic minor scale, you start on a concert C instead, you get this sound. So that semitone movement is at the bottom of the scale, as opposed to the kind of midpoint or the upper part of the scale. Okay, so we get this real lovely kind of chromatic element at the beginning, the lower part of the scale. Really gives it that kind of Arabic kind of quality. In fact, this scale has several names, one of which is the Arabic scale. It's also sometimes known as Phrygian dominant or altered Phrygian scale, or sometimes the fifth mode of the harmonic minor, for those of you who are familiar with this idea of modes. But that's all it is. It's the F harmonic minor scale, but starting on the fifth degree, on the note C, concert pitch. So when you come to improvise on the A section of this tune, you can stick entirely to that scale and create a very meaningful, very effective, very stylistically appropriate solo. Or even if you don't want to use the entire scale, you could just stick to the first 3, 4, maybe 5 notes of it, if that's all you're comfortable with. And even though you're using more limited melodic vocabulary, you can still create a very effective, very well-structured solo by thinking in terms of creative use of rhythm and space. A good solo isn't one that fills every moment with sound. A good solo is well paced, well timed, and has moments of reflection, moments of space, moments of silence. So think about that in your solo. Also, try to evoke a sense of that melody in your solo. The great thing about this melody is that kind of juxtaposition of more kind of heavily articulated passages that feature staccato and shorter note values with a more of a sense of legato and smoother phrasing. So try to evoke that kind of juxtaposition in your solo. I'm going to demonstrate just by blowing over the A section, and I'm going to try and limit my use of melodic material. I'm just going to stick to the first 4 or 5 notes of that scale, but I'm going to be more preoccupied with creating a sense of timing and space and using various kinds of articulation within my phrases. Now, those of you with really keen ears may have noticed at the end of the phrase, I departed from that F harmonic minor sound. The reason being that, of course, the A section remains on that C7 flat 9 sharp 5 for the first 12 bars, but then it does resolve to F minor. Now, because we're playing F harmonic minor, you can continue to play that chord scale over the F minor chord. But if you want to give it a real sort of sense of resolution when it arrives on that F minor, you might prefer to shift the harmony slightly away from that harmonic minor sound and more towards a sort of Dorian sound. I won't get too bogged down in what that means necessarily just yet. But instead of having that flat 6th degree, we can acknowledge the fact that this chord is an F minor 6. That's what the keyboard player or the guitarist, whichever harmonic instrumentalist you're playing with, will be playing. Now, in a minor 6 chord, the 6th degree is natural. It's not a flattened 6th like in the harmonic minor. So in this case, when we resolve to F minor 6, it's going to have a D natural in it as opposed to a D flat. So if you really want to give your improvisation that sense of resolution at the relevant moment in the harmony, you could bring out that D natural instead of the D flat, which I think is what I did at the end of my musical example. Another approach to playing over that A section, improvising on that A section, is to think less in terms of a scalic sense, which is what we've been doing so far, running up and down that chord scale or playing various permutations of it, and thinking more in a triad sense. Now, if you remember when I was at the piano earlier on illustrating the harmony for this tune, I was suggesting that piano players might choose to alternate between a C major triad and a D flat major triad on the A section. And what that does is it evokes that sense of the C7 flat 9 sharp 5. So when we improvise, we can also use that pair of triads in our improvisation in a way that will express the harmony in a similar way. So let's say we take that C major triad in root position, C, E, G, and then we're going to go up a semitone and play the D flat major triad in root position. And we've got a triad pair. A triad pair is two triads that don't share any notes in common that we can extract from a chord scale and then play with them. So if we take those two triads and just weave them in and out of each other over that A section, it can sound very effective. So although I played them in root position there, we could play them in their various inversions. So say I started on the C major in root position, and then the D flat major in root position, so I'm going to go up a semitone. And if I then go up to the third of the C major chord, the E natural, and play that triad in first inversion this time, E, G, C, and then go up to the third of the D flat major triad and play that triad in first inversion, F, A flat, D, and keep going up sequentially like that, I get this sort of sound. And although that sounds very mathematical and pattern based, if you put that kind of language into your solo, it will make this tremendous musical sense and will really kind of help to outline the harmony in a very kind of overt way, and also quite a modern sounding way. Another variation of that pattern would be to go up the first triad and then down the second triad and keep working your way up the horn with that sense of sequence like this. And then coming back down. So obviously when you play those two triads in that very sequential kind of pattern-based way, it doesn't sound like genuine improvisation. But it's an important thing to remember about learning to improvise as a jazz musician is that you have to learn that essential material, those building blocks, that vocabulary, in a very disciplined, structured way first, before you can be truly innovative with that material. So get those two triads under your fingers in that sequential way first of all. And then the next process, which is far preferable when you're on a gig, let's say, is to be more creative with that material. So improvise with it, truly. Play around with the inversions of those two triads, mix up the order of the notes, change the rhythm considerably, put the triads into different registers on your instrument. If I was to use this kind of triad pair approach on this tune Caravan on a gig, I'd probably do it more like this. Okay, so the bridge section of this tune, as we've already discussed, moves through a series of dominant seventh chords. It starts on F7, concert pitch, and then moves through the kind of cycle of fourths through a series of dominant seventh chords until we arrive back at our C7 flat 9 sharp 5. Now, I could do an entire tutorial, probably several tutorials, on dominant seventh chords and what to play when we improvise over a dominant seventh. As jazz musicians, our eyes kind of light up a bit when we see a dominant chord because there's so many scale options, so many modes we can borrow from, so many different strategies we can employ to improvise over a dominant chord. But I'm going to stick today with perhaps the most fundamental, which is the Mixolydian mode. Now, the Mixolydian mode is the fifth mode of the major scale, and it's a major mode. So if our chord is F7, the first chord of the bridge, we're going to be thinking in F major. But crucially, the Mixolydian mode has a flattened seventh degree. So if we were to play an ordinary F major scale, the seventh degree would be E natural. In this case, we're going to flatten it so it becomes E flat. So our F mixolydian is going to be F, G, A, B flat, which is in the key of F major, C, D, E flat, our flattened seventh, and then F at the top, and it sounds like this. Now, if you improvise with that mixolydian mode over the F7 chord, that will sound entirely convincing. And then if you transpose that language through the various dominant chords and apply the mixolydian mode to each of those, you will sound very consonant, very diatonic. The improvisation will make a lot of harmonic musical sense. But there's one other option, well, there's several other options, but one other I'm going to give you today. A very simple alteration you can make to that mode to create the bebop scale, as it's become known, because it was utilised by a lot of the bebop musicians in the 40s, and ever since, really. Now, we've been talking a lot about this flattened seventh degree in the mixolydian mode. If you include the raised or natural seventh in addition to that flattened seventh, remember that the flattened seventh is the predominant chord tone, so that if you add the major seventh as a kind of passing tone, not something that you would linger on particularly on a dominant chord, but like a little passing note between the flattened seventh and the tonic at the top of the scale, that gives you the bebop scale, and it sounds like this. It's particularly effective when played in descent, so coming down the scale. And just by using that simple chromatic alteration to the mixolydian mode, you can sound very stylistically like you're acknowledging that kind of bebop tradition. If I demonstrate now blowing over that bridge section, those various dominant seventh chords, using exclusively that bebop scale. As I said before, don't feel that you have to use the entire scale. It's quite a fast tempo, this tune. So it'll take you a while to get that, be really fluent with all of those bebop scales under your fingers. So one way to practice might just be to take a little cell, a little motif within that scale and focus on that. For example, right now I'll look at the area at the top of the scale, which for me is that interesting bit where you've got that chromaticism going on with the two different variations of the seventh degree. So I'm going to focus on that little cell within the scale and try and transpose it through the various dominant chords. So if this talk of mixolydian modes and bebop scales is all a bit too much, I understand there's a lot of notes there to negotiate. What we can do is we can strip it back to the four most important pitches of any chord scale, which are the chord tones. Now the chord tones are the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh degrees of the chord. Okay, so if we're thinking in terms of F7, which is our first chord of the bridge section, our root is F, obviously. The third is A, the fifth is C, and the seventh, which remember is a dominant seventh, a flattened seventh, is E flat in this case. Now what those chord tones do is that they express the harmony in the most decisive way. They're the four most important pitches in terms of determining the tonality and the function of the chord. So if you just play those four pitches, or any of those four pitches, you will express the harmony in a very overt way. So this time I'm going to improvise over that bridge section again, but I'm just going to use the chord tones, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the moving harmony in my improvisation. Just a little note for rhythm section players when you come to attempt this material. I've provided some suggested bass parts and keyboard parts and guitar parts which match what is happening on the backing track that I provided. But remember, you can interpret it however you like when you come to play this tune yourself, okay? It's always a good idea to listen to what's happening in the rest of the rhythm section. So if you're a keyboard player, for example, listen to what the bass player is doing and try to play something that either mirrors or matches what the bass player is doing in some way, or at least slots in with what they're doing, complements what they are doing. Similarly, drummers should be listening to the bass player, to the keyboard players. You're a little unit. You listen to each other, you interact with each other. And one of the great things about being a rhythm section player as well is that sometimes you are initiating ideas that others will latch onto and mirror back at you or reflect in some way. And sometimes you are the one doing the reflecting or the responding to some material that you hear elsewhere within the rhythm section. So really, obviously, listening is such a crucial skill for any jazz musician, but arguably for you guys in the rhythm section, it's even more important than it is for anyone else. You have this very special unit that is very much based on constant interaction. Now, drummers, I haven't provided you with a chart, and that is mainly because I want you to interpret this groove however you like. Obviously, you can listen to the drum part on the backing track as a kind of a broad reference, but really do your own thing with it. I repeat, listen to the bass player, listen to the keys, and try and do something that slots in with what they're doing. But really, all you need to do is broadly remember that the A section is a Latin groove and the bridge is a swing. In order to get that sense of the form into your consciousness, you can look at the bass part if you like, but far better really would be to listen to the track, and in fact even better than that, listen to recordings of the tune, so that you get a sense of that form and you know more intuitively when that bridge section is coming, and that will come across in your performance of this tune. So please try and do that if you can, and use the other rhythm section parts as little more than a reference. So thank you very much for watching this video tutorial on the tune Caravan. Hopefully you feel a little better equipped now to play the tune, and more importantly to improvise over the chord changes within it. Remember, there's a lot of material here. It takes a long time to digest, to get it into your consciousness, to get it under your fingers, but with practice I'm sure you'll get there. Try to have fun playing this tune and listen to as many recordings of it as you can. Try to absorb the inspiration of the great players. That's how jazz works. It's very much a kind of master and apprentice discipline. We learn from the great players, from the pioneers, and we absorb their wisdom and assimilate their material before we can be truly innovative with it ourselves. So just bear that in mind when you attempt to play this tune. But yes, above all, have fun with it and keep an eye out for more of these lockdown tutorials. Thank you very much.